to Masters of Modern. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with a guest co-host. Welcome, Jonathan. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing excellent. Hello to all of our amazing listeners here at Masters of Modern.
Really quickly, let everyone know who you are. Where do you come from? What brings you to the podcast world?
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Young. I'm a singer and music producer most of the time. You may know me from my YouTube channel, where I have made a lot of heavy metal cover songs of songs from popular culture, Disney movies, anime shows, stuff like that. I also have my own original music out there that usually the anime fans don't click on because they just want more anime. But I've been playing Magic for years and years. I hit Mythic #1 once just to show off my creds. I used to play Modern every Friday at my local game store. I had Jund foiled out up until Ragavan got printed, and then I gave up on keeping Jund foiled out. So I've been playing Magic for a long time, and so I collided with the Magic scene when Wizards hired me to make some soundtracks for Kamigawa and Capenna, which I was like the lead music director on. So now I'm suddenly talking to all of these people that I've been watching in the Magic scene for years, which has been strange. And I'm like disassociating because my hobby is colliding with my job, but c'est la vie. So
well, welcome. For just so people know what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about. Well, I guess for those who are joining the podcast for the first time, we're mostly a modern Magic the Gathering focused podcast. We've kind of expanded that into talking whatever we want to talk about, especially during the last 3 years. Opening up has made it so we can keep this podcast going. But try to bring it up to that modern spin. We've been going on for a long time. But today we're now going to like put on our like fake sunglasses and mustache, and we're now the Masters of Pioneer podcast. We've just transitioned. It's weird.
Yes.
It feels so similar, but now everything's in metric. And someone has a French accent for some reason. So I've recently bought into. What kind of started this conversation? I recently bought into Abzan Greasefang for Pioneer, and realized that like, hey, would love to get a deep dive on the format. Love to talk to someone who has a lot of experience on it. And you, I posted on the internet, and you reached out as our resident Pioneer and Explorer, which is what it is on Arena expert. And so we're going to do a breakdown into that format. What's going on there? What's the difference between Explorer and Arena and Pioneer and Paper? And also kind of what the difference is between those and Modern, and then talk a little bit about the world of Dominaria United. Thank you,
yes.
Wizard, for the code sign behind me that had the words written out that I was able to read. Dominaria United, and what cards from that might make a big hit or a small hit in the formats. So first question, what's good with Pioneer? Why is Pioneer sweet?
Yeah, so what I always like to tell people, I have two different pitches for Pioneer. If you're an experienced Modern player, my pitch is always Pioneer is what Modern was like 5 years ago. It's a really healthy format that lets you explore a lot of higher powered deck building with a very wide card pool. But as we move into the twilight of Modern Horizons 2, Modern has now become a format that really demands your attention to all of these finer points of the metagame, understanding exactly how all of these Urza's Saga, triggers work and when to respond to each of them, and what are you running to deal with Ragavan, and how many of these evoke creatures from Modern Horizons 2 are you running, and all these different things that frankly I used to play Modern more than anybody I know, and I haven't been able to keep up with it. But especially now with Liliana of the Veil being printed into Standard, which means it's in Pioneer, Jund in Pioneer is arguably closer to traditional Boomer Jund in Pioneer and Explorer than current Modern Jund is. And there's other things too. Like you can get away with playing Arclight Phoenix and have it be almost as good as it is in Modern, but the rest of the field is way slower. So if stuff like that, if you're like a Phoenix fan or whatever, there's a lot of familiar archetypes, but it's dialed back a little bit to give you some more room for deck building. If for whatever reason you're listening to the Masters of Modern podcast and you've never played any Modern, maybe you're listening because of Commander or something. I love to tell, especially my casual Commander friends, or if I have any friends who like only draft or whatever, I love to basically tell them like, look, you could probably succeed porting your standard draft archetype deck, whether it's like ninjutsu or rogues or something. You could probably port that into Pioneer and put up a good fight against the field. It's a really healthy format for deck building right now, but it still requires you to, like, it's still got a high ceiling. You still have to be good at the game. You still have to understand the card pool and the meta. There's still, tons of sideboard tech. So yeah, long answer, but Pioneer's great.
Well, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's also with Modern Horizons 1 as a test and Modern Horizons 2 kind of cementing this, eventually leading to the Lord of the Rings set. For a long time, Legacy was a feasible format to support.
Yeah.
And with that being true, all of these like Battle Bond and Conspiracy and Commander product would be able to print cards that would also find a second home in Legacy and Vintage, technically. And so that gave kind of some existence to those formats. But I think with Legacy basically becoming unfeasible due to the cost of like already the SEG series was pushing them to be, $500 for a dual in, and then, Logan Paul and Posty and, the actual, these became like these hot collectible thing. The trading card market boom, and every reserve list card that's actually worth owning is now $10,000 or $1,000 or more. And so now like anyone trying to get into Legacy is feasible, but difficult outside of a proxy existence. And so Wizards at the same time also noticed that like Modern was just becoming massive. Like 2 years ago, there were more cards printed since Modern was created than there were in Modern at its creation.
Right.
And that has gotten worse or better depending on how you look at it since since 2 years ago. As Wizards has printed more cards over the last 2 years than ever before. But as they noticed, and this is like the background of why Pioneer was created, but the onus was like, okay, we need a format that is the standard feed off. That's what Modern was created to be. We need, and that's what Extended was before Modern. We need a format where people can kind of bleed into once their deck rotates out of Standard. The more likely cards from Standard are going to be able to actually affect the format and see play, and is like purely a Standard but bigger experience. And we've tried rotational formats. Those don't work. So why don't we just add a new format in between and call it Pioneer? There were stumbling blocks at its creation that eventually hit the brick wall that was COVID, which like everyone was affected by, both literally and Magic the Gathering format wise.
The other thing that happened, which I think is really interesting, that so I had started to feel a little bit of fatigue from Modern around the same time that Pioneer was first announced. I was incredibly excited about Pioneer. I immediately I brewed like 10 Pioneer decks and started playing heavily right before COVID hit. But the other thing that happened, so Pioneer came out, we had like a couple months or whatever. If I'm remembering correctly, we were just coming off of Hogak. So
Pioneer was created with Eldraine, which was right after Modern Horizons 1, which was when Hogak was.
We were coming off of a really nasty winter or whatever for Modern.
Too, because it was Modern Horizons came out, and that led to Hogak being a problem.
Then Oko was printed.
And Oko was printed. Yep. Once Upon a Time was printed. Yeah. And then those were banned. And then you had Karn with Mycosynthitis and
then KCI happened. So I was just to give you some context, I was playing Modern every single week throughout this whole period. So it was like I would go to the shop with my, good old fashioned Jund, and get dumpstered by Hogak. Then Hogak got banned. I would go to the shop. I would get dumpstered by Urza and KCI. Then KCI got banned. And then I started playing Sultai, and Oko got printed, and then Oko got banned, and now my deck's gone. And it was like, then this new format got announced, and I was like, man, I never want to have to play against a turn 3 Karn ever again. I'm going to play Pioneer. This is awesome, right? But the other thing that happened right before COVID was there were 2 decks that were unbelievably toxic in Pioneer that, in my opinion, made a lot of people lose interest even before COVID happened. And that was Inverter and Heliod. And it was like 20% of the meta.
But even before that, where like, because what you're talking about, the Oko Hogak problem, Pioneer then did the like rolling ban and starting, right, where they banned a new card every week to fix. Like they started with no ban list Pioneer, and then they built it based on tournament results. Which in a normal time frame would have maybe been a cool idea. In the year with more bans in Magic, in standard, modern, every format, there were more bans than like any other year in Magic history. It just created this like, that sounds, all of the problems I'm having in other places, Pioneer is that but every week.
Right. And then they stopped that rolling ban. They stopped that rolling ban right when Inverter started becoming a thing. So for a while, if you queued up for a Pioneer queue on MTGO, it was like every single deck you would play against would be Dimir Inverter combo. And if it wasn't Dimir Inverter combo, it was Walking Ballista Heliod. Thankfully, those things are banned now. We got through COVID for the most part, and Pioneer is a healthy format again, and I couldn't be more happy. We got Explorer on Arena now. For those of you that don't know, it's everything that's legal in Pioneer on Arena is called Explorer, and then once they finish catching up with the rest of the cards that aren't yet on Arena, then it's just Pioneer.
And I think to kind of the creation of Pioneer and where it's going to get more and more popular is I do think I think like the Lord of the Rings set and the Modern Horizon sets, I think sets are going to be printed now, the supplementary ones, in 2 paths. You're either going to be, this is very obviously for Commander, and that's Commander Legend, that's Unstable or Unfinity, that's whatever the next version of one of those is going to be. Or you're going to be a Modern Horizons-esque set. Like the next Conspiracy is maybe going to be more of a Commander one, because and if there's a Battle Bond 2 or whatever, like these are all things that are going to like find a very obvious home in one of those 2 formats, which is fine, but it does put Pioneer in a position where like, this maybe is the place where people are looking for more standard tested, focused, aged cards to battle each other.
And it's more stable because both Modern Horizon sets, if they're any indication of what the future holds for Modern and Commander, both Modern Horizon sets have brought like absolutely earth-shaking staples to every Modern deck except maybe Tron. Like almost every deck is like completely different, and old staples that were worth hundreds of dollars are just getting pushed out of the format one by one by all of these new things like Ragavan. And it sucks to be a deck brewer trying to keep your deck together and, be confident that your deck will be good for more than 6 months. It almost feels like Modern is rotating now,
Which I do think it's some of a little bit, just because we're now a year and a half from Modern Horizons 2, and it's been pretty stable other than like a few new cards being printed through the standard process. But which would always, that happened forever, right? There was always this Phoenix was printed, or Eldrazi was printed, but I do agree that like I think Modern was already going to be expensive, and Modern Horizons has just added to that process, which is Modern is the new Legacy, which has there's benefits to that, right? There's been like Legacy was cool that I could play True Name Nemesis and Scavenging Ooze before it was printed in the Modern, and Baleful Strix, right? Like that's a cool feature to Legacy that like it would be cool to Modern to have that, but then having Pioneer be the alternative to that is great. And honestly, the thing that got me the most interested in buying Abzan Greasefang was literally that Liliana the Veil is printed, right? Like them bringing, because the problem I've had with Pioneer is like I don't love most of the cards in Pioneer.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I like love Snapcaster Mage. I love Path to Exile. I love Lightning Bolt. I love Liliana the Veil. These are cards that like define my Magic personality. And when you look at like Thoughtseize is there, which I guess is cool.
I love Thoughtseize. Maybe that's why I love Pioneer.
I do love Thoughtseize. I'm a Jund Pox player at heart.
Yeah.
But the like edition of Liliana definitely was like, okay, they're gonna start hopefully printing some of the cards that are just like now powered out. The fact that Snapcaster Mage and Path to Exile are no longer staples of Modern is sad, right? Those are the cards that like for me define that format. And if you can print them into Standard to lead into Pioneer or some of those cards, then that makes it more and more fascinating to me. And I do think that like fetch lands are a mistake. I think they should have never been printed.
Yeah, and that's like one of the appealing things about like kind of this new era of these eternal formats. And I don't mean to sound like I'm talking crap about Modern, because Modern will always have a place in my heart, but it's almost like they're turning Modern into what Legacy should have been by giving it all of this special attention through these sets. And then they're turning Pioneer into what Modern should have been by kind of realizing that fetch lands were a mistake, realizing that some of these keywords that they printed, like maybe Storm and Dredge, are like really, really get out of control fast, depending on what text you put on later sets. Stuff like that. I mean, no hate to Dredge or Storm players, but it's like, those elements of the game are really hard to balance around. And the more cantrips you print, the better, or the more like mana neutral effects that you print, the better every Storm deck in the history of Magic becomes. And the more graveyardy, Golgari theme, mill yourself cards get printed, the better every single Dredge card in the history of Magic becomes. And it was kind of getting to that terminal velocity with Modern where it's like, man, like every new, like they almost can't print anymore. It's like the meme with like, oh, it looks like Dredge got a new toy, right? It's like that was happening so often. But that's the thing. Like you could try to play Dredge in Pioneer, but you're not going to get some of these ridiculously high-powered tools.
Arguably, that's what the Abzan Greasefang deck is, right? It's more.
You could say that,
Vengevine Reanimator like list, but that's honestly more appealing to me than pure Dredge ever is, right? I think there's also like there's a way to kind of like I think what Wizards has done, because they're very smart, with historic is and not as much with like the modifying of cards, but more with the like printing cards into historic through the like historic anthology lists, is it lets them test these much more classically high powered cards into a what I would call a softer or a safer format where it's a lot easier for them to just ban them or change them or modify them. See, like, oh, does Fauna Shaman break Pioneer? Would because I don't think Fauna Shaman's a Pioneer right now. Would these XYZ cards that we're able to print into historic, see how they do? Does that break it? And then, can we consider printing this in the Standard, or can we consider printing this in the Modern with like older legacy cards that currently aren't there, but they're able to add through Modern Horizon sets? Because I think like what it feels like they're doing it to all three, right? Like what they're doing to Explore, where they're slowly printing the important cards from Pioneer into Arena to eventually bring Arena to Pioneer. What they're doing with Modern, where they're slowly looking at new, cool, powerful cards to include in Modern Horizon sets, but also the Modern Horizon sets are about bringing Counterspell into Modern, bringing the Cycle lands and the forgetting its name, but the 1-mana sacrifice a creature zombie, and bringing these like defining legacy cards that can be reprinted that aren't on the reserve list and do define archetypes there, and bringing them into Modern. Like I would not be surprised over time if we eventually see some of the more like legacy E staples. I think we'll never get Brainstorm. I don't think we're gonna get Force of Will. I don't think we're gonna get not Strip Mine, Wasteland. I think those are gonna be like,
you say that now, but if you would have told me that Counterspell would have gotten printed into Modern and Lily of the Veil would have been printed into Standard, I would have never believed you.
That's fair. So I think Wasteland is possible, other than it's pretty toxic. Like I think a Wasteland variant is possible. I think if Wizards sees like, oh, there are lands cards are a problem in Modern, and none of the tools we provided are good enough. Now I think they're doing a good job of finding tools that are good enough. Like I think the Bosiju is like their version of answering that, right? Like, okay, we need a Wasteland variant that's Modern playable, that's good enough. Here's a version of that that's not Wasteland, that doesn't have the Delver. I'm actually playing a Strip Mine deck. You're never going to play a land spell after turn 2, and I'm going to kill you with my 1-drop decks. I think that's what they want to avoid. Force of Will. I think Force of Negation has to be bad for Force of Will to be printed into Modern. That's like the one caveat to it for me. Or there's like some creature thing where it's close. Like I think all those cards are on the line. But I also think though, as you print more of these powerful cards in there, Modern's ban list becomes much more interesting to like pull the veil off of, right? Like there's a version of unbanning like 10 cards on that ban list at this point, and seeing what shuffles out, what works, what doesn't work. I think that would be like a really weirdly interesting play to do right now as we're like just exiting the world. Maybe after Magic 30 and we have Black Lotuses and beta drafts on the line for Modern tournaments.
Yeah.
But like once we enter like a little bit of a down moment, because like someone, I forget who it was, someone ran a Modern a no ban list, a pretty big no ban list Modern tournament, and like they had their top 16 that you could go through, and there's definitely cards that just need to stay banned, right? Like pretty apparent was like Hogak didn't do very well, but every deck, and some of them were main decking Liliana of the Voids just because they assumed Hogak was going to be a problem. Another deck that did really well, the decks that were like the most defining was Dark Depths, was just like 3 of the top 8 was a Dark Depths deck, and it's like, okay, that's a good evidence that card shouldn't be unbanned. Crow Mox was just like half the decks were playing it, they're all degenerate, even though like the least degenerate decks were also playing it because it was how they were, so it was like there was like some cards that were like, okay, these shouldn't come off the ban list. But so like doing a full-on no ban list Modern sounds like doing to Pioneer what Pioneer's early days were like. But I think there's a version where you're like, you know what, Birthing Plan, Birthing Pod, Splinter Twin, Faithless Looting, like all these cards just come off,
Punishing Fire,
Treasure Cruise, Punishing Fire, GT, like there's a version of pulling the veil off and seeing what does Modern look like, and as Pioneer becomes more supported as like more of the like, I'm gonna call it the safer format. Modern seems a little bit more like, oh, how much can we make this? Because Legacy is an amazing format. If you want to talk about some of the fun I've ever had playing Magic, it's playing Legacy. Other than the fact that I needed 4 Tundras to be able to even get there. So it's interesting what Wizards' plan is for all of their formats and how they're feeding into each other, and how they're learning like, hey, we can put Liliana in the Pioneer. Or like if that's honestly, I think Snapcaster Mage and Crimson Vow, or not Crimson Vow, the one that had flashback, Midnight Hunt would have been fun.
Yeah, that would have been amazing.
Would be really cool. I don't think it like the fact that Lightning Bolt wouldn't exist in the formats it would be in is like an interesting feature of the Snapcaster Mage to exist.
Right. Yeah, that was something I was going to mention. I mean, I can maybe dive more into it later, but like one very interesting thing about Pioneer right now is that, I mean, one kind of thing that Wizards is doing more recently with kind of their design style, at least the way that I'm interpreting it, is that threats are really good and removal has not quite yet caught up with the threats in the way that it is in Modern, where in Modern you have all these different options for like 1 or 0 mana interaction in multiple different colors. You've got Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Path, all the Evoke cycle, Bolt, Force of Negation, all these different things. You have like 10 different variations of Spell Pierce in Modern. But in Pioneer, you've got Fatal Push and Thoughtseize, and that's about it for 1 mana interaction, other than like Shock type effects.
Mystic, just portable hole. I mean, that's like one thing that's interesting, right? Like for
Yeah.
Modern, for almost its whole existence, the top 5 most played cards were all 1-drops, and it was black, white, and red's removal spells, Lightning Bolt, Thoughtseize, which is kind of a removal spell, and Path, and then it was Noble Hierarch, and then it was blue Serum Visions, right? Blue, whatever version of blue draw a card for 1 mana it had, that was the best. It eventually became Opt, and eventually, sometimes Thoughtseize would become Fatal Push, and sometimes Fatal Push would become Inquisition or Kozilek, but those are kind of the 5. And if you look at the top most played cards in Pioneer, the number 1 played card is Unlicensed Hearse, which I think is hilarious. But then it's Fatal Push and Thoughtseize, Mystic Dispute, which is kind of a 1-drop, depending on what your opponent is doing.
But I mean, I'm pretty sure Unlicensed Hearse and Mystic Dispute are both, or I don't know about Explorer, but or excuse me, I'm not sure about Pioneer, but I'm pretty sure those are both just sideboard deck in Explorer. Which
happens in Modern too, right? There was one point where Ashiok was like the number 1 most played Planeswalker in the format, and it was because they were one of the best sideboard cards because
that was during the Hogak era as well. It was Ashiok was like the most reliable way to just shut everything off,
wreck someone. So. But Portable Hole is the other big removal spell that's on here as like a 1 mana way to kill things. But there's definitely, it's interesting. So me and Ben and Marshall, who has the podcast, and Michael, who's one of the co-hosts, came up with a commander variant called Artisan, which is like only uncommons and commons. And it's almost the opposite. That format has like no threats. It's like the most threat light format I've ever been in, where like people will make decks and then just be like, oh, I can't win because none of my cards do anything. I just put the top 30 best removal spells ever printed because all of those are common and uncommon.
Right.
I have every Path variant ever printed, but I don't have a 4/4 or better. And so it's interesting that this is kind of on the other side, where it's like you can play threats and they're relatively safe, where like a Braid, Bone Crusher Giant is like a big deal. And with Thoughtseize being really the policeman. And that was true. What was true of Modern for a long time. And maybe now it's Force of Negation and the Elementals. But for a long time, Thoughtseize was Modern's Force of Will. It was, Jund was always there to say, you need to be a little bit more honest than you think you do, because I'm going to win 55% of my games. I'm going to lose 45% of them. And or tournaments, or however you want to say that.
Staying honest.
But your plan, if it needs to be able to survive the 3 best cards in your opening hand going away, and that's what and it's one of the things I do love about Thoughtseize is it's a great police person. It is a worst case scenario, which is what Force of Will is in Legacy, where you can win on turn 0, and what Force of Negation and now Solitude and Fury are in Modern. But so what's the fun? What other than Jund, which sympathetic? What deck should I be playing in the format?
So looking at what's in the metagame right now, most of it I'm really, really excited about. There's a couple things that I think are going to kind of become kind of the boogeyman of the format pretty soon here. We've got Rakdos Aggro, or Rakdos Midrange, depending on how you build it, which is a little bit, the metagame breakdown is a little bit inaccurate here, because the Rakdos Aggro umbrella also contains Cat Oven, and the Cat. So there's, you kind of have to think about Cat Oven as like 5 to 10% of the meta right now, and I'm not going to lie to you, it's rough. It is pretty brutal. If you're not a fan of playing against Cat Oven, these next couple months might make you very tired of Pioneer or Explorer.
It does. It does have them. So I think it has Rakdos Sacrifice as 5% of the game, and then Rakdos Midrange, which I think is the Liliana of the Veil deck.
Yes.
And if you look at the Explorer version, it's already Jund. It says Rakdos Midrange, and then it's black, green, red.
Right. So Rakdos Midrange is kind of like the Jund right now. I've been tinkering with this a lot. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, because I could talk about Jund variants and Explore for hours. But because of Cat Oven, Greasefang, and Arclight Phoenix, which are all very powerful decks in this meta and are all dependent on having a specific card in your graveyard stay there for a certain amount of time and then pulling it back out on a certain condition. Because of that, there's a couple cards that will kind of just give you automatic wins if the circumstances are right. One of those cards is Scavenging Ooze, which is part of why Jund is becoming popular in Explorer and Pioneer. Obviously, pretty self-explanatory. You eat the Perihelion, you eat the Phoenix, you eat the cat. Graveyard Trespasser is an interesting card that is blowing up right now in Explorer and Pioneer because it works kind of as this evasive mono black Scavenging Ooze type threat. It's got Ward with discard a card, so your control opponent has a really hard time 2-for-1ing themselves when they try to blow up your Graveyard Trespasser. It flips into a 4/4 that eats 2 things out of a graveyard and then drain gains twice, which means it's a very versatile threat and is basically a main board card that could be a sideboard tech against these 3 very powerful graveyard strategy decks. Going back to what I mentioned about how their removal is a little bit sparse in Pioneer, you've got these things in Rakdos aggro, Rakdos midrange, like the Blood Token Vampire, whose name escapes me. Blood Tithe Harvester?
The Blood Tithe Harvester.
Yeah, so Blood Tithe Harvester is interesting because it fills a very unique role in this red-black archetype that's blowing up, because it makes a blood token, which gives you deck filtering. It then turns itself into a little bit of a removal spell if you need to deal with something in a pinch, in addition to obviously being a 3/2. But the important thing about that blood token that people aren't thinking about is that you don't have fetch lands in this format, so you need a way to trigger your Fatal Push. So that blood token stays on the battlefield, and you can kind of hang on to it. And believe it or not, a lot of these black decks that want to run Fatal Push are having a hard time running it unless they have something like a blood token or a treasure token that you can sack whenever you want for super cheap to proc your revolt. Because, as we're already seeing, 3-cost creatures are the kind of the sweet spot in Pioneer right now, where almost every threat in a lot of these good collected company decks, a lot of these mid-range decks, even some of these aggro decks that have something like a red devotion theme, a lot of them, they'll have a 3, like a Bone Crusher Giant. Like, you have to deal with that. You want to deal with it with your push, but triggering revolt is actually like something you have to think about in this format, which, love it or hate it, it makes deck building a little bit more interesting. Liliana the Veil, obviously an amazing card. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is kind of a mid-range powerhouse right now. Moving on from the sort of Jund equivalent, you could also make a black-green rock, swap out all the red cards for Questing Beast and Assassin's Trophy, stuff like that. Pretty much the same idea. Then you're obviously familiar with Grease Fang. For anybody that doesn't know, you put a Perihelion 2 into your graveyard, reanimate it with Grease Fang on hopefully turn 3.
And I don't know, because listeners matter way more than I do.
Sure. So Grease Fang from Kamigawa is a 3-drop 4/3 rat that at the beginning of your combat, you get to reanimate a vehicle and it gains haste. So of course you put the biggest vehicles that you can into your graveyard on purpose on turn 2 with something like a is it Grisly Salvage that
so the deck is playing Satyr Wayfinder, Rafine's Informant, which is the Connive white looter. It's playing Grizzly Salvage and Withered Bloom Command as its 4 main self-mill effects, and then it's playing 4 Grease Fang and 3 to 4 Can't Stay Aways, which is the flashback reanimated value 3 Sun Titan effect for black-white. And then it plays Essica's Chariot, Sovereign Council Flagship, and Parhelion. Parhelion obviously being the best one. That's I'm playing a reanimator effect.
Of course.
I'm playing a giant angel that. But the thing that's important is all 3 of them have enter the battlefield effects, right? So they're
Perihelion is attack. Perihelion. It's important that Perihelion is, because I've almost lost because That's a very important difference. But yeah,
they have one Greasefang does the thing. The turn they come into play, they get to do a thing before they return to your hand through the drawback of Greasefang. And so Parhelion, you get worst case scenario, worst case scenario they kill it. But if they don't kill it, you have 12. You do 12 damage, and then you end up with another 8 power worth of angels in play. Essica's Chariot, you end up with 4 cat tokens in play, 4 power worth of cat tokens in play, and then
you'd have 6 power because Essica's Chariot would get crewed right away and copy one of your cats.
Oh, does the crewing
the attacking
then gets crewed?
Yeah, so the attacking of Essica's Chariot would, assuming they don't kill it at instant speed as soon as it enters the battlefield. If you get to attack with Essica's Chariot, then you have 6 powers of cats.
It gains haste. Return target vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to its owner's hand. Oh, so Greasefang has to crew Parhelion.
Right.
Okay, so you still have to do the crewing feature of the deck.
Yes, so it doesn't become a creature. Yeah, so Greasefang brings it back and then crews it herself.
Yeah.
And that's usually the pattern. And Essica's Chariot, the reason why Essica's Chariot is busted is mainly because you play it, get 4 power of cats, tap to crew with the cats you just created, and then make another cat.
Yeah, it's basically a Grave Titan.
Yeah. So you're making 6 power of tokens in addition to the 4 power Essica's Chariot, and that's just the first turn it attacks.
And it's very easy to, like, that one specifically is very recastable, right? Like, yes, if you get Parhelion from the graveyard into play, you have to discard it at some point. You have a while, but if you get Essica's Chariot, worst case, you just on turn 3 Greasefang, turn 4 Chariot is a
And since you're running these Satyr Wayfinder and Grizzly Salvage effects, you're almost never going to miss a land drop. So it is a very important inevitability that, like, turn 5, you might just hardcast a Sky Sovereign and bolt something, and that's really good.
Also, for modern players, it gets to play Tasigur, the Golden Fang, in the main deck, which is sick.
That's an important card that we do not have yet in Explorer, is Tasigur.
Interesting. So that's it's only in Pioneer, not in Explorer, because Khan's block is one of the big missing pieces.
Khan's block and Shadows over Innistrad block are the 2 blocks that are very noticeably missing from Explorer right now. So
the Shadows block one's fascinating to me because it's programmed into Arena. So when Arena launched in beta, it had Shadows block on it. It started.
You're breaking my heart right now, man. I didn't know that. You're breaking my heart because, dude, Delirium is like one of my favorite mechanics ever. So if that's in the game,
I have no idea why they haven't added it. And, like, it's blown my mind because like, they had that in Kaladesh. Those were the 2 they had, and the Kaladesh remastered happened relatively quickly.
Yeah.
For some reason, we just still have Shadows yet. I'm like, why?
Oh man, that would be amazing. I'm gonna be so happy when Shadows hits.
I was surprised it didn't come out last, like, right on the tail end of Innistrad. Right?
Dude, maybe they'll do it. Maybe they'll do it for Halloween. Maybe I can get my hopes up.
Well, the problem with this year is now, like, we have like 6 sets coming out within like 3 weeks of each other. We have a preview card on this podcast for unstable. I keep calling it unstable. Unfinity. It's because it's not a real word.
Yeah.
And then that's all because of shipping delays, right? Like, Unfinity was the reason we had, like, weirdly 2 months of no content, and now we're getting both Warhammer, Unfinity, this set, Dominaria United, and Brothers War, and technically the Phyrexian one between now and December.
Yeah.
So less than 4 months at this point, we're getting 5 product releases. Was because shipping sucks right now. Worlds, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's Greasefang. That's the deck that I own now. So anyone who wants to check decks of Greasefang.
So Greasefang, it's super. It's a drag racer. It's a super linear. It honestly, like you mentioned, like, it feels kind of like Dredge, but I was almost going to say it feels like Grizzlebrand. It feels like cheating out of Grizzlebrand in Modern does.
I think if you played Vengevine back in the Standard days, or Vengevines in Modern, it feels the most like a Vengevine deck, almost closer to like the Hollow One Vengevine decks, or even Hogak to some extent. It feels like Hogak without the, like, this is too busted to exist feature.
Yeah.
I think
An important thing about the Grease Fang though is that if you and part of what I like about Pioneer is that despite that we're lacking some of this cheap interaction like Path to Exile or Lightning Bolt or whatever, we do have these tools like Scavenging Ooze, Graveyard Trespasser. The sideboard tech in Pioneer and Explorer is actually pretty robust. We have ley lines. We have all of these like Nihil Spellbomb type effects that they've printed recently. So the Grease Fang deck is one of those where like if you have a Scavenging Ooze and 1 green mana open, you're pretty much safe against the Grease Fang deck, which is cool if you're in the driver's seat when that happens, but it's also not cool when they kill your Scavenging Ooze. So it's kind of one of those decks where it's like very kind of poker face. Do I have the interaction to stop you? Do you have the interaction to stop my interaction to stop you? Phoenix deck, very similar. I was just gonna say like Phoenix deck and Cat Oven are very similar in that sense, where it's like, you know, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm gonna assume that you know what both of these archetypes are from Standard. But if you don't, Arclight Phoenix, you play a lot of spells and bring 4 Arclight Phoenixes back for free and swing for 12. And then Cat Oven, you infinitely soft loop Cauldron Familiar to slowly drain your opponent and have a blocker every turn that always comes back. But again, if you have a Scavenging Ooze, if you have a Graveyard Trespasser, if you have a Kalidas or whatever, these decks start to get soft. But it's one of those things like they're always going to take game 1 off of you, kind of a thing. So those of us that are familiar with Modern are kind of going to like Vengevine or Dredge. Like it feels similar. Like Phoenix feels kind of like a Storm thing where they beat you game 1 and then you have to put in all of these like damping sphere effects. And
well, the one thing that I definitely like, and what's one of the reasons I think Scavenging Ooze is such a good game is you want to be careful against decks like Grease Fang in the sense that, like, you know, Blood Moon against Tron was always like kind of suspect in Modern, where it was like on paper this sounds good, but in reality I spent my turn 3 playing a 3-drop that didn't do anything, and they spent their which has given them now the time to draw 7 lands and just play hard on turn 7. And it's like, oh right, and one thought not zero was printed. It's like, oh, I guess I'm just not. This is hard. Or not, but yeah, like there's definitely like
Reality Smasher as well.
Yeah. There's inevitability, and like the inevitability of I just will eventually draw enough lands to cast Parhelion from my hand, and I don't need my graveyard does offer levels of, you know, threat that's interesting. Like that's an interesting game, right? Is like making sure your graveyard hate doesn't tempo you out of the game from them just being like, okay, fine, here's a 4-mana Esseka's Chariot, here's a 5-mana Sky Sovereign, here's a 6-mana Cassiger, here's a 7-mana Parhelion. And I was able to curve out because my first 3 turns were, you know, Wayfarer and Grizzly Salvage, and just drew lands for 3 turns while you played Graveyard Hate. Banned Spirits is a deck though, which is another Modern.
There's a very, very healthy population of tempo decks. It's not like in the metagame, but I would also kind of put like rogues in there too. I don't see it as much in Pioneer, but on Explorer, I definitely see it. Like you play an evasive creature on turn 1, you're protecting it with like Spell Pierce kind of. This is like the Delver of Modern, right? Like you've got like these spirit strategies that are kind of like, you know, doing all these tricky things to protect their 2/1 flyers and then swinging at you. So super interactive decks, super sticky, much like Delver or something like that. I don't really have anything else to say about that. I mean, it's a super healthy part of the meta, and, you know, bring your fatal pushes, you know?
So like one of the things that's really interesting is like we've always kind of said in Modern, where like even when cards are banned, archetypes kind of don't shift too much. There's been a Birthing Pod deck in Modern forever.
Yeah.
It just became, you know, Collected Company, and now it's Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth decks. And there's been an affinity deck of some variety where it was affinity, then it became Hardened Scales, then it became like Urza shenanigans, and then now affinity's back in like 3 different forms, including Hammer Time. You know, there's always been these like a beat down semi, interactive tribal deck, be it merfolk, be it human, be it spirits. And so it does feel like Pioneer has taken, there is a Junt in this format. There is a blue-white Glorious Control. There's a Vengevine Reanimator Graveyard Shenanigans. There's a blue-red Tempo Is It Phoenix deck. There's a mono-red Burn. There is a Humans deck. There's a, there's definitely feels... There's some things that are missing, right? But there's even the things that are missing have analogous-ish things. And the format's still relatively new and untested, right? You are a little bit in that
100%.
We know what the good decks are, and then the Summer Bloom deck comes out of nowhere with actually 0 new cards printed into it, or Lantern comes out of nowhere with actually 0 new cards printed into it. And it's like, oh, this deck has existed in this format since the beginning, but no one thought about it. And now it's the best deck in the format.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that that's exactly what you're looking at. Plus, Standard just affects this format so much more. The Greasefang deck is a great example.
Every new Standard set is shaking up Pioneer. I can't emphasize that enough. Every single new Standard set, we've gotten a card that has found a really important home somewhere.
So that's what we call a segue. So next we're going to be talking about new Standard cards from Dominaria United Pioneer. But before we do that, we do want to thank our sponsors. First off, thank you so much to channelfireball.com. If you are looking to buy cards, their store is really awesome. If you use the code the MMcast there, it helps us out. It helps you out. You get a little bit of a discount, and plus just send them love for sending us love. We always appreciate it. Also, a big shout out to Ultra Pro, who's our product sponsor of the podcast. And the streams we do, we use Ultra Pro sleeves. They're great. You can also go to ultrapro.com to get those out. Big shout out to Wizards. They sent me this really dope Dominaria free box. It came with this stained glass window that is plugged in a way that it's probably easier for me to move my camera and show off my entire apartment really quick. Trying to get a vibe of what it looks like. I got the red mana one, which is obviously the best color. It's in Jund, it's in Phoenix. And then this giant massive box behind me, plus this is a Johnny shirt that I'm wearing. Sadly showed up in the middle of it's a long sleeve shirt in the middle of a massive heat wave. So hopefully it cools down to wear this more than this podcast recording. And last but not least, just follow both of us on the internet. Our Twitters are below us. Thank you, editors in chief. And click on all the links below to find us other places on the internet like TikTok and YouTube, etc. All right. So Dominaria United's coming out. There's some heaters in there. We already talked about Liliana the Veil, which I don't even know. Is that the most influential card for Dominaria United kind of out the gate? Do you think?
Yes. Okay. I mean, it's what can I say that hasn't been said in the Masters of Modern podcast? You know what I mean? It's like if you stick a Liliana, Control is a big part of the meta in both Pioneer and Explorer right now. If you stick as a Jund player, if you can stick a Liliana of the Veil against your Control opponent, you're winning that game. You know what I mean? So even if it just goes in your sideboard in whatever black deck you're playing, it's incredibly, incredibly important. It's really good in the mid-range matchup. The only reason I'm not seeing it as much as I wish I was seeing it is because, I guess, first of all, because I'm playing mostly best of one in Arena, which is my first mistake. But second of all, there's all these graveyard decks that want to be discarding, like Greasefang. Sometimes the Greasefang player is shuffling to try and get their Connive card so that they can pitch the Perihelion in their hand, and if you play a Liliana, you're kind of helping them out, so you better have a Scavenging Ooze or whatever, a Fatal Push or Assassin's Trophy ready. So it's kind of like, it's an amazing card. It feels perfectly balanced for Pioneer, but it's a little bit off meta right now because so many people want to be discarding. There's a bunch of cards here. So you mentioned that there's
a few have grabbed the elf, the new Leaf Crown.
I was just going to mention there's an elf and a merfolk lord that could both respectively make their tribes viable in Pioneer for the first time. I got crushed like an hour ago on Arena by an Explorer elf deck with because they've got the lord that searches up other lords. From, was it Core 20 that we got that elf lord where you can pay 6?
Caller.
Yep. We've got that. We've got a bunch of big beater elves, and Land of War elves and Elvish Mystic are both legal. So the elf deck has legs, guys. Like collected companies legal. We're in it, you know. The
Well,
Merfolk Lord.
Sorry, go.
Oh, I mean, same with the Merfolk Lord. Basically, it's like the Merfolk Lord gives Merfolk legs for the first time in Pioneer.
Yeah, it does. So. It does feel like the Merfolk Lord probably had. Well, in Modern, both are like massive boons. Especially, I think. Interestingly enough, I think elves is farther away because Fury hurts it more. Like that's been the big anti-elf tech for a while. Even though this card does definitely give it more legs, or I think it's more beneficial. I think the Merfolk on the other side, where Merfolk are in general a little bit more resistant to Fury, just because they're all like they're all thick.
Yeah.
That card really, I think, does give it a lot of legs. The new Flash Merfolk Lord, that card's bonkers. I don't even know. Like it's so wild that card exists.
That card's insane.
Yeah.
Rona's Vortex, I think, is gonna. So it's an uncommon. It's a 1-mana unsummon effect. Return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. That is important that it says you don't control. But then it has kicker for 2 and a black to put it on the bottom of its owner's library instead. And I'm actually seeing tempo decks and control decks, like Esper control decks, running this either in addition to Fatal Push or kind of instead of Fatal Push, because in the early game, when it's a 1-mana unsummon, that's all you need to stall out till your Supreme Verdict or your Languish or whatever, which are both legal in Pioneer. So control has very powerful legs to stand on. And then later in the game, when you're top decking it and you have 7 mana open, it's a 4-mana, effectively 4-mana exile. Which is super, super relevant, especially since there's no path in this format. There's not really any reliable 2-mana counterspells in this format. So your unsummon, your tempo effects, especially in any kind of anything north of mid-range, any mid-range tempo or control, you have less options for your turn 1 and 2 interaction, which means that something like this that's versatile and can fit not only into your turn 1 curve, but also into your late game permanently deal with something. I think that card is we're going to see a lot more of it.
So we've kind of talked about Fatal Push has like its flaws in the format. So Cut Down was a big, like a lot of people were talking about walking into it. It's already seeing play in Standard. I have been going through lists of the last 7 days, which is the first time that Dominaria United cards are added. It does feel pretty missing. I found 1 copy in 1 Rakdos mid-range list.
I think that this goes back to what I mentioned to you earlier about how this format is more threat dense. So if you actually like think about this card for a second, this can't kill a Greasefang, right? So it can't kill a Greasefang. It can barely kill a Phoenix. It can't kill a Kalitas. It can't kill a Scavenging Ooze with 1 counter on it. And it can't kill a Graveyard Trespasser. So, like, as I'm thinking through these threats, it's like it hits everything in mono red, and that's like it.
Right. It's like, interesting that it's almost a better card in Modern, where your main things are
100%.
And
because like I was saying, like turn 3 is like where you play the creature that you're hoping ends the game, whether it's your 5/4 elf that can't be blocked by anything, whether it's your Greasefang that reanimates your Parahelion, whether it's your Graveyard Trespasser that exiles your opponent's Parahelion, and that's a tough sell to have a 3-drop creature be 5 total power plus toughness. So I don't think that this card's good enough. I'm seeing people run 1 or 2 copies of it, and I have never. I mean, there's almost no creatures in any of my decks I've been brewing that get hit by it. So, you know, I'm hoping that we get something maybe a little better.
I'm seeing more Terra Sunders. The white green instant kicker white or 1 black. Exile target artifact enchantment if it kicked. Exile target non-land permanent instead.
I think this card is good. I think it's tough though because
Assassin Trophy exists.
Assassin's Trophy exists, and Binding of the Old Gods exists, which also has ramp stapled to it. And is Maelstrom Pulse legal in Pioneer?
No.
Okay, but Putrefy is.
No. No.
Yeah, it
Don't
is.
quote me on that. Yeah, it is. You're right. It's in Ravnica 3.
Yep. So Putrefy is legal, which makes it kind of a tough sell to have to go 4 mana for a creature when you can get creature or enchantment for Putrefy.
Sure.
For 3.
Some other cool cards. This is like this Jund list is playing so many heaters. It's playing Soul of Windgrace, and it's playing Grog, and it's playing Braids, Arisen Nightmare.
I think that we're gonna see a lot of the new Sheoldred for at least a bit here. I don't know if it's better than like Questing Beast Kalidas in the 4-drop slot.
Who was it that I want to say it was Sam Black, but that seems that I forget who it was. Someone wrote today on Star City Games that based on the results they're seeing in Standard so far with Sheoldred, that Sheoldred is currently, in their opinion, more powerful than Omnath is in Standard.
Wow.
Omnath was in Standard, and they think it's possibly comparable to more powerful than Omnath is in Pioneer. They said in Legacy, in Modern, where there's fetch lands, that's not necessarily true because the landfall trigger scales up better there.
Of course.
But in formats where it's a lot easier through Connive and other and blood tokens where you're drawing cards extra to get multiple triggers off Sheoldred, and you're punishing your opponents for doing the same, that Sheoldred is going to just be this really dominant life swing force. And because it's still 5/4 Death Touch, right? Like the base stats
4/5.
4/5.
Yeah,
it's
5 toughness. 5 toughness. If you look at the creature pool of what people are playing, 5 toughness. That's eating Bone Crusher Giants. It's eating even a flipped Graveyard Trespasser.
Eats Esika's Chariot.
Yep, eats Esika's Chariot. There's a lot. The mono green collected company Stompy deck is basically all 4/4s with trample. So it eats all of those, and it has Death Touch to make sure that you can get block a chump block a Kroxa or whatever, and send it back.
You're killing whatever you're fighting, and a lot of the big threats of the format you're surviving. Which is pretty sick.
Have you seen the card Cruelty of Gix?
I've seen it. I'm pretty sure it's a.
So I think people are sleeping on this card. No pun intended, because we have Phyrexian sleeper agents or whatever. But
I promise you, sir, I am definitely not sleeping an agent. I'm not here to slowly corrupt everyone. I don't know what you're talking about.
So it's a 5. it's a 5 mana saga with read ahead, which means that you can start on any of the chapters. The first chapter is Thoughtseize, but only creature or planeswalker. The second chapter is just a demonic tutor, lose 3 life. And then the third chapter is reanimate from your opponent's graveyard or your graveyard. So at minimum, this is 5 mana, just reanimate anything. But at maximum, if you're actually playing the full read ahead, you're Thoughtseizing your opponent, you're searching up, and somebody did this to me, and that's why I'm thinking about this card, is because I'm not gonna lie, I'm salty about it.
You're mad.
So this is what somebody did to me, and it was so clever. They played this with the chapter 2, the tutor. They fetched a Liliana. They played the Liliana on that turn that they fetched it, and used it to discard a Titan of Industry, which was their reanimator target of choice. So, whatever piece they needed, that this is kind of a self-contained. Not only does it go get your reanimator target if you need it, or go get your discard enabler to put something in your graveyard for reanimator, but then it reanimates the following turn. So if you play some kind of black control shell that wants this inevitability of bringing back a 10/10 or something,
you can just black control, Liliana the Veil, turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 play something that blocks and attacks, or another Thoughtseize, turn 3 play Liliana the Veil, turn 4 play Sheoldred, turn 5 play this, Thoughtseize them, tutor for Titan of Industry, discard it to Liliana, and then that sounds so sick. Actually, I need to build this deck
And
too.
you kind of have to remember that turn 5 is kind of like the turn 4 in Pioneer to Modern, right? It's like
Sure.
like you're like just like how you're always going to kind of make it to turn 4 Bloodbraid Elf in Modern Jund, you're usually always going to make it to turn 5 in Pioneer in terms of how long the games last. But
Well, and Jund decks or any black based decks in both formats always really
Right.
add like an extra turn to their turns because they get the Thoughtseize their
Yeah.
opponent, so at least gets them turn. If a game would normally end on turn 4, they're going to end on turn 5. Where because their opponent won't have good cards anymore.
Yeah, I think the new Squee might be Pioneer playable.
Okay.
I mean, it's I could see like a kind of like the mono red control decks that would play Goblin Rabblemaster in Modern.
Mm-hmm.
I could see somebody making something like analogous to that. Like it's like a Rabblemaster that you can like escape from your graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's maybe not as powerful as a Rabblemaster, but it's definitely more resilient.
There's a list that that's playing Urtai, the Resurrector. They're the Resurrected.
I love that card, dude.
List.
I love that card. That's one of my favorites from Damu is Urtai. I think that card, it's the best version. I mean, think about Snapcaster Mage, right? Or like Assassin's Trophy, right? Like you're like normally Snapcaster Mage would be 2 mana to get a 2/1, and then you pay another mana to Path to Exile or from your graveyard, right? So you're paying 3 or 4 mana total to get a 2/1 and then get rid of something and then usually give your opponent a basic land or whatever, right? Urtai, you're paying about the same amount of mana, you're getting a 3/2, and then instead of giving your opponent a basic land, you're giving them a card. Right? So like in a vacuum, if you see the downside of giving your opponent a card as being similar to ramping your opponent like Path to Exile does or Assassin's Trophy does, like it's kind of just a Snapcaster Mage plus whatever you would target with Snapcaster Mage baked into one card, and it's a 3/2 instead of a 2/1. Like that seems crazy.
One of my favorite cards of all time has been Venser, the original Venser, like the bounce blink thing. And so Urtai is like right in that same location, and makes me a little sad. Purely from I was like really hoping we were going to get Venser back when we got to Dominaria, when we go to New Phyrexia. Like, yes, he teleported his heart in the card. I still have faith, but I now don't think we're going to get.
They'll do it. They'll do it someday.
The Urtai card is not going to be what Venser is. We're going to get like he's going to do more of a like, maybe it'll be like Birthing Pod for Instants and Sorcerers or something. We'll find out. So the last kind of one conversation, and we touched upon it a little bit throughout the podcast, is talking about stuff getting added, but also the differences from Modern. A big one being fetch lands, right? Like that. I think is like. What effect do you think it's had on Pioneer, not having fetch lands from the beginning?
Well, I mean, first, the elephant in the room is that it's way easier to get players into it because they're like, if you have a friend, especially like somebody younger, who like they're going to get irritated shuffling their deck every turn. Or somebody, we're all broke. It's 2022. Look at the economy. Like nobody wants to buy fetch lands right now. So I think that just on that alone, you're going to be a lot less lonely. You're going to find play groups faster playing Pioneer than you would in Modern. And I feel bad saying that because guys, I love Modern, but man, my list of people.
Oh, sorry, go.
I was just complaining about how I can't get anybody to play Modern with me anymore because it's so expensive.
You'll be able to build communities around Pioneer a lot quicker than you'd be able to build Modern. It's like finding Pioneer store or Modern stores is probably easier right now than finding Pioneer ones just from a legacy of play. But if you are going somewhere that's fresh, who's like a store that's just growing from Standard, it's a lot easier to start a Pioneer community for sure.
Yeah. The other thing that I might have mentioned earlier, I know I mentioned it before we started recording, was that Fatal Push is a lot harder to turn on. And mana bases are a little bit tougher to perfect because we don't have, if you think about a fetch land as a 3 to 5 color mana source, because you can get any, you can get tri-lands with fetch lands now since Ikoria. So like, if you think of a fetch land as being able to get any color in your deck, we don't have that anymore. So if you have like a Watery Grave in your hand as opposed to a Polluted Delta, your Polluted Delta could go and get you red or green or white by proxy of the Shocklands or the Triomes. But if there's a Watery Grave in your hand, that's blue-black. You're going to have to deal with that, you know? So what we're seeing is, like, for example, the Jund players are coalescing into mostly either black-red or black-green, depending on how fast they want to try and end the game. We're seeing the Bant Spirits, especially on Explorer, coalescing more into Azorius Spirits or even Mono Blue Spirits, because it's a lot harder to have a mana base where you don't get punished by the Mono Red player if you're shocking every turn, right? So, and I think that especially with how much Standard has power creeped, I think that kind of taking everything and slotting it backwards and making it a little bit harder to have perfect mana is a good thing for the balance. Because if you want to play a triple green pip 5/4 trample, like, every land in your deck has to tap for green. You know what I mean? Like, you don't get to cheat out of it like you would in Modern with like an Abzan or like 5-color humans or something like that, where like you're playing, like, you're tapping for like a double black on turn 2 and then Azorius on turn 3. Like, you're not, you're gonna run into mana fixing problems if you do that. Which, as much as it pains me because I'm a Modern player to need to make the hard cuts and say, you know what, I can't run green in this Jund deck because there's not room. As much as I hate to do that as a seasoned player, I think it's good for the format.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also, like, I mean, to your point earlier, easier to get into.
Right.
If you have a play set of shocks, which a lot of Modern players already have, and you have your play set of Thoughtseizes, this deck is $100.
Yep, exactly.
Maybe
and a lot of these,
depending on like random weird staples, like,
yeah,
and like, that's astounding. I like straight up bought this Greed Fangs deck out of the box for less than $300 because I had the Thoughtseizes already and everything else in the deck. I just like, okay, it's easier for me to do this and find my overgrown tombs in 8 different commander decks and Modern decks, and like, that's the top 4 best decks in the format versus, you know, that I think is a big success story. And as it's grown, there's cooler stuff you can do. One of the problems with Pioneer also when it first started is like, it's a lot of just like standard decks from ages past or weird broken combos that just happen to exist. Now there's like this grease, like there's decks here that like didn't exist before, or you're creating something new that I think is cool.
There's a lot, and I'm seeing new ones every day. Like like there's these things that are going to sneak up on us, kind of like Hollow One did back when it first broke out onto the Modern scene. And you were mentioning other decks like that where it's here, but we just need to like find the right card for it. You know, it's like every card that we get with black pips makes Gray Merchant better in Pioneer. And it's not anywhere close to being on the top of the meta right now, but once a day, I run into somebody who's running mono black devotion with Gray Merchant in the Pioneer or the Explorer queue on Arena, and I lose to it, you know? Like, and every time that they print a new black card, you know, you've got stuff like this, the Raven Man from Dom U, you know, maybe somebody might make an 8-rack deck, some kind of a discard tribal deck with cycling or something. I was telling Shivam the other day that cycling and channel both proc Raven Man. Mm-hmm. You could do some kind of like a young pyromancer, cycle stuff on your opponent's turn, make a bunch of 1/1 birds, and then swing out, kind of a thing with and that's like its own deck. There's nothing else like that in Pioneer right now. And every time that they print cycling on a card, that random quirky little deck is going to get that much closer to breaking out of the meta. And I love that about formats. That's why I fell in love with Modern back when, like, way before the Horizon sets made it a lot harder to deck build.
And
outside of that,
in this format doesn't kick your butt as much as it does. And that's not true of Explorer. That is my like biggest complaint with
right.
Arena generally is like Arena is so punishing to brewing cool ideas unless you like have been collecting every card forever. But in paper, this format's really not, because it's so inexpensive. And a lot of the expense is just in Shocklands and the Kamigawa pitch lands. Like, you get really far. You can brew a lot of really cool ideas where, like, you can do like mono black zombies, where you're just like Thoughtseize Duress, Champion of the Parish, Crypt Breaker, Laser Top Reaper, the Raven Man, Liliana. Let's go.
Yeah, there it is. And I mean, a good chunk of these decks that are high in the meta are like monocolored decks or close to being a monocolored deck. And some of them, like this Boros aggro deck, is a heroic deck that's using like 50 cent. I mean, at least I think they're 50 cent. What was the last time I checked Favored Hoplite? 50 cents. Right. Illuminator Virtuoso, 50 cents. 10th District Legionnaire, 25 cents. Those are the main threats in this deck. And then it's all like 1 mana pump spells. And that's the whole deck. And then you just need your Sacred Foundries. And then you want your Inspiring Vantages, but you could get away without them because it's a 2-color format,
There's a $85 Chandra Tribal deck.
Yeah. I love that. I love that about this format. But I think people sometimes forget that, like, if you want to casually brew like a modern mono green elf deck in Modern, you still probably want fetch lands in that, even if you're monocolored, because like the elf deck is so dependent on like top decking another elf every single turn after you've hit your, you have like effectively infinite mana.
You also want to be black green, right? Like you're pretty much the value of not being elves is going to be pretty low, and elves, even with that, where you're playing a Windswept Thief, if you go to Catacombs just for the splash, is a $700 deck.
Yep,
like that's
I just mean like
deck and
like trying to play in Modern and avoid fetch lands on purpose to save your wallet is like incredibly difficult.
So I will say right now, the fetch lands are not the biggest punch in the wallet.
Right.
Like because of Modern Horizons 2, because so much value is in the pitch elementals. Like Endurance is the thing that's really expensive about this stuff, right? Like the pitch elementals and Ragavan, the fetch lands value at your average enemy fetch is $20 to $5. Which is still not cheap. And compared to Pioneer, where you also still need the shock lands, it's definitely expensive. But it is an interesting time, between the two sides. But yeah, I think I'm super stoked with this format. Is there anything you want to talk about beyond these subject matters before we do? It's been an hour and a half, so we can.
Oh wow! Yeah, time flies.
Yep.
I mean, that's about it. Like, I think that, I guess a closing thought is that Wizards is paying attention now to like a lot of these different things that maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago might have not gotten attention. Like we're getting we got like this Death Shadow style card, Shadow of Mortality in Streets of New Capenna, which is Pioneer legal. And it's another one of those things. It's like, if you're a Shadow player, they're kind of thinking about you. They're keeping you in the back of their mind, and they're printing stuff and we also got in the new Zendikar another creature that's kind of similar to that the sort of Death Shadow style. So it's one of those things where we might not have Death Shadow. I love Death Shadow. It sucks that we don't have Death Shadow. We probably couldn't have it safely be legal. Maybe we could, but I think that one advantage of how quickly they're printing cards and how much they're exploring the design space, especially as it pertains to Pioneer, is that we're getting new cards that fit a bunch of different archetypes very quickly. And I think it's not going to be long before everybody playing Modern feels like they have an analogous deck that they fall in love with in Pioneer, if not already. And I'm super excited about that because I'm all about being able to play a format that my friends can afford to play, being able to play a format that my family members, my sister is getting into Magic. I have all these people in my life that are learning Standard and learning Draft, but they would never be able to jump from Standard to Modern, and I want to be able to play with them. So
Right.
Pioneer really gets me excited because I've got my Legacy, I've got my proxied out CEDH deck. Like I've got these things that I can do if I want to play with the deeply entrenched longtime players that know all of the lingo and know all of that stuff. But on a day-to-day basis, the people that I'm having over to my place to have some pizza and chill out are people that would be way more likely to play Pioneer. So I'm just excited to be playing more Magic. It makes me excited to keep playing the game.
And I think like to that point, right? Like Magic is growing rapidly, and every year it's grown rapidly from the year it was before that. And the bigger Magic grows, the harder it is for these newer players to get into older formats, Modern included. And we have a ton of guides that, like on this channel of like how to get into Modern if you're interested in getting into Modern or you want to figure out starting points, because there are ways to do it. But as it grows, those things get more expensive. It becomes a little bit more difficult, a little bit more daunting. Pioneer is and to the statement I made, it's reverse compatible. I said, like, hey, if you play Modern, you already have the mana base, you already have the Thought Seizes, you have a lot of the cards you need, especially if you've been playing Modern for a while, a lot of staples that were good in Modern that are no longer. You can retroactively apply them. You have the Lilianas of the Veil already to play Pioneer. That's true in the vice versa, right? Pioneer is a great stepping stone. If I buy Pioneer Jund, I now have Lilianas, I now have Thought Seizes, I now have the mana, like everything but the fetch lands for the mana base. Like it is a building stepstone to get people into Modern, while also a great format on its own. So I think like for the first time in basically since Pioneer has existed in the last 6 months, probably I've like definitely appreciated Pioneer a lot more than when it first showed up at the scene, partially because what we talked about before. Its arrival was bumpy. It landed in Chicago airport. There was a snowstorm going on that had to park in Fort Worth for 3 days.
And I think Explorer is big too, right? Because it with every passing year, there's more and more people where I feel really old saying this, but I'm meeting more and more people where Arena is really their first real exposure to Magic. And
right now, the two main ways you entree in Magic are Arena or Commander.
Yeah.
And it's like not close to anything else.
And with that in mind, like, I don't think it's realistic for us to expect, if we talk realistically here, Magic Online is probably not getting overhauled anytime soon. Arena is the future. We're not going to get Modern on Arena anytime soon, which means that Pioneer is the eternal format of the Arena generation. And, regardless of your thoughts about Pioneer right now, it's I didn't have much of a reason to want to play Arena prior to Pioneer because I was a Commander player and I was a Modern player. And I didn't want to play Standard. I didn't like drafting at the time. Now I've grown to love drafting, but at the time it was like there's nothing for me on Arena, right? But now, they got me. They printed Liliana of the Veil, and now I'm playing Arena every night. You know what I mean? It's like I can come out here and admit, like, this Jund player is happily grinding on Arena every single night, and it's because they made me feel at home in this format, in this new space.
For sure. And that's what I'm excited to is like Liliana proves, like right now, as of Dominaria United coming out, I believe we have now entered the longest period of time that Lightning Bolt hasn't been in Standard. We've now beaten the previous M10, which was the previous longest era since Lightning Bolt rotated out, which is wild, but also makes me feel like Lightning Bolt's coming back sometime soon.
If they can reprint Liliana, I think that they can reprint.
I think they're reticent to bring Lightning Bolt into Pioneer, right? Because one of the
Yeah.
in the way that Force of Will and Wasteland and Brainstorm define Legacy, Lightning Bolt and Fetch Lands and whatever define Modern. Now, I would have told you that that's true of Liliana the Veil as well. So I think there is eventually a moment like, hey, Liliana is maybe too good, or Greasefang and the Giant and all these X3s need a little bit more of a police person to beat them up. And Lightning Bolt, that's the moment they are like,
the problem with Lightning Bolt is that it's not just an answer, it's a threat.
Right.
And so I think Path would be way more safe for Pioneer.
Sure.
Because or even Swords,
And like Path doesn't see play in Modern anymore. Sword, Lightning Bolt does. Like Lightning Bolt is still a Modern staple,
right?
Path has been outclassed, so I agree. I think Path could be reprinted, though it does feel like they're now like, we want to explore new Path areas. We want March of the White One, and we want Portal Hole,
and that is seeing play a lot.
Yeah.
Like the White March is seeing play in all the control decks. We have Soren's dad is missing card from Unexpected Absence. Destroy target creature planeswalker its controller investigates for 2 mana. Like, they're definitely tiptoeing deeper into giving us better removal spells, which makes me really excited.
We didn't talk about it, but there's the new domain one for 5-color decks. That's one. If you have, it's I think 5-1 or 6-1. No, I think it's 5-1, 6 mana O-Ring with Flash, but it has domain. One less for domain. So if you're playing any of the Yorion lists, which we didn't talk about, but there are 2 Yorion decks. There's an elemental one, and then there's a control one. It's the same as Modern. Yorion should be banned in every format. I hate that card so much. Talking about shuffling, but that in those decks, that O-Ring is better than Path in some ways.
Right, but it's way harder to go 5-color in this format, which makes it.
That's why I was pointing out the decks that exist already that are 5-color. But you only need a Triome. You need one Triome. It's a 2-drop.
That's true.
Like, they get real far at getting you domain. If you had to choose right now between Path to Exile, Snapcaster Mage, and Lightning Bolt to be printed into Standard to be added to Pioneer, which of those? And I want this comment below with your answer. We're not doing trivia today. We're doing, what card do you want to be added? Snapcaster Mage, Lightning Bolt, or Path to Exile. Which one of those 3 would you want added to Pioneer if you had to choose between the
3? Man, I think my vote is for Path.
Okay.
Because I think all aggro gets way too good in Pioneer. Like, red is already really good in Pioneer. I think all aggro, Phoenix, Jund, mono red, prowess, heroic, whatever it is, I think it all gets slightly too good if Lightning Bolt is legal. And I think that all control gets, like, if Snapcaster Mage was in Pioneer.
There's no Mana Leak, there's no Remand, there's no Lightning Bolt, there's no, there's not a lot.
Yeah, but
not a lot of 4 mana.
But we have Supreme Verdict, Settle the Wreckage, the Foretell board drop. We have Teferi, multiple Teferis.
Well,
we have
those are all great control cards. But my point is, the Snapcaster Mage target, like what like Snapcaster Mage
that's
is
true.
When it's hitting 1-drop.
Maybe you're right.
2-drop instant speed spells.
Maybe you're right. Maybe Snapcaster's the safest because there's nothing really to hit.
Maybe, like Thoughtseize, right? You can, but that's sorcery speed. If like,
ooh, yeah, okay, I changed my vote. The Snapcaster Mage, Sultai Control, baby. You talked me into it. I would love, dude. That was my Modern deck for the longest time, though. It was turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, turn 3 Snap Thoughtseize, and that was my life.
And now you get the new Sultai, which we didn't talk about, with the Sultai Tarmogoyf, the Lurgoyf, the Urborg Lurgoyf.
It's only really good in dredgy stuff, though, because you really have to have a lot of creatures in your graveyard. Because Tarmogoyf, Thoughtseize fetch land is already huge.
You can play with spells, but
right.
I mean, I think your argument for Path makes a lot of sense too, right? Like, the format needs a graveyard anti-graveyard efficient removal spell that's good against both Phoenix and it's good against just standard aggro decks. And Path has this fairness feature which it ramps your opponent, right? Like that's always been a fair. So yeah, Wizards, get a Snapcaster Mage. Also, just do both. Let me Snapcaster Mage and have to exile people. That's the best thing you could do in Magic. Why can't I do it in Pioneer? I would if I could Snapcaster Mage. I still have my Liliana playset is in a modern deck that is just 4 Snapcaster Mage, 4 Path to Exile, 4 Liliana the Veil, Stoneblade. I don't care that it's bad.
Dude, I mean, that sounds a lot like what my Sultai deck was right before I stopped playing Modern. It was, Lily, Thoughtseize, Snap, Goyf, and I didn't care it was bad.
I want to do 2 things. I either want to self-mill myself and get a Parhelion or a Vengevine or a Hogak into play, or I want to just Snapcaster Mage Path to Exiles until you don't have any creatures anymore.
That's a noble goal, my friend. That's a noble goal.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. This has been a blast.
Thank you.
Where can people find? Once again, last time. Where's the one place you want people to go to find you?
It probably honestly, probably Spotify. Probably the first time you've ever had anybody on here saying to go to Spotify, but
Ben has his whole band thing.
That's true. That's true. Ben is amazing, by the way. Ben's music is killer.
It's really good. Yeah, this might be spoilers. I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to get yelled at. It's not the first time. I think Ben is trying to do some music. Are you going to the Magic Summit?
I don't know when it is. I haven't thought that far ahead.
It's in November. It's the Brandon Sanderson, which I should be pitching this anyways because we're supposed to. This is the month now that the Kickstarter is done. I'm advertising Summit. There's a big Magic event. It's in November. The MMcast is going to be there. Ben might be trying to pull off doing a show there, which is why I was bringing that up. That's how this all came up. Segue. And if you use the code VMMcast or MMcast. Marshall will put the letters on the screen because I will find out and text him, and whatever is in front of me, or it actually might be Kess. I think if you use the code name Kess, that you get a discount, and they throw some love too. If you're going, please use that. I actually think it is Kess, Kess, and Ben's trying to do a show there as well. So you can see Ben live, which was what. And make sure to check out Jonathan on Spotify too. You have so much music homework to do, listeners.
Do it. Yeah. Otherwise, YouTube works well too. I have a lot of stuff on YouTube. That's like my main platform. But YouTube is in a weird place right now as a platform. So I always Spotify is usually the end goal because I'm not a vlogger. I'm a musician. So usually we're trying to push people from YouTube to Spotify. So YouTube is a nice place to see who I am. But at the end of the day, trying to get you to put my stuff on your gym playlist on Spotify.
Your goal is to get our listeners to go to YouTube so that your YouTube channel can get them to Spotify, and you could just cut the middleman.
Just skip that. Just go straight to Spotify and check me out.
Money. Give it to. I don't know. Does Google? Who owns Spotify? It's got to be someone.
It's just Spotify. They own like 80%. Well, I mean, they're like 80% of the music streaming market right now. So
sure.
Kind of like how Netflix is its own entity. It's kind of like the Netflix of the music world right now. But
that makes sense.
Anyway.
But yeah, so thanks everyone. If you follow me on everything from TikTok to Twitter at Kess Wiley. Once again, thank you Wizards for the cool, awesome gift box. I will do some pack. I did some pack openings for the collector boosters. I'll be doing a set booster live stream sometime next week. And thank you again, Jonathan, for joining. Everyone, give Jonathan Young some
thanks everybody.
And we'll talk to all of you. I think the plan is to do just like Pioneer content for a few episodes. So get ready, everybody, and we'll see you guys next week.
Awesome.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.